Hey everyone, I'm Allison Mars. You're watching NBC News Now. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida saying that he and his family are victims of a $25 million extortion plot. The New York Times reporting that Gaetz is under federal investigation for a possible sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl. Gaetz denies those allegations and says he is cooperating with federal authorities. More on this coming up. Over in North Korea, new satellite images showing activity at a nuclear lab. Is Kim Jong-un's regime reprocessing plutonium? And it is the third day of Derek Chauvin's murder trial. On the stand, the Cup's food employee who took the counterfeit $20 bill that led to George Floyd's arrest.
Did you think that bill might not be legitimate?
I did.
So what did you decide to do?
I took it anyways, and I was planning to just put it on my tab until I second-guessed myself. And as you can see in the video, I kept examining it, and then I eventually told my manager.
All right. And when you told your manager, what happened next? What were you told to do?
He told us to go out to the vehicle and to ask him to come inside to discuss what just happened.
Let's go to NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald. She is outside the courthouse in Minneapolis. Megan, today was also the first day that we saw surveillance video from inside Cup Foods. Tell us about that and some of the other highlights from the courtroom today.
Yeah, that's right. This was the first time that any of us, the jurors or the public, had an opportunity to see George Floyd just hours before he died inside Cup Foods. We saw him as he was milling around, shopping around. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we heard from Christopher Martin, 19-year-old cashier who sold him that pack of cigarettes. And Martin on the stand there testified that his first interaction with George Floyd, he asked him if he was a baseball player. George Floyd then responded with a delay saying that he was a football player. In that moment is when Christopher Martin said that he had an assumption that George Floyd was under the influence of something. He was high, is what he said. But what really stands out here is this idea of taking that counterfeit $20 bill. Martin testified that he didn't believe that George Floyd knew that it was a counterfeit bill, which is why he sold it to him in the first place. Then he started to think about it, told his manager that it was fake, had to go out there and ask George Floyd to come inside. That happened twice. Of course, George Floyd never came inside, and that's when the manager directed an employee inside the store to call 911. I want to play for you this exchange between the prosecution and Martin just moments after he stepped outside to see what was happening with George Floyd and Officer Derek Chauvin. Take a listen.
George was motionless, limp, and Chauvin seemed he was in a resting state, meaning like he just rested his knee on his neck.
We saw you standing there with your hands on your head for a while, correct?
Correct.
What was going through your mind during that time period?
Disbelief and guilt.
Okay. Why guilt?
If I would have just not taken the bill, this could have been avoided.
He said he was in disbelief and he felt guilt. We definitely start to see a lot of emotion coming from these witnesses. Just moments ago, within the last hour, we heard from a man by the name of Charles McMillan. For the first time, the jury was seeing this body camera video showing the moments that officers had this struggle with George Floyd as they were trying to put him into the police car. And you could hear on that body camera video, Charles McMillan having a conversation with George Floyd, trying to tell him he's not going to win and to just listen to police. Later on during the testimony with the prosecution, McMillan started to break down, basically saying that he felt helpless and that he, too, lost his mother. And so there actually had to be a break because this witness was just so overcome with emotion. So here we are, the third day of hearing from witnesses here in this trial, and you can see just how emotional it has been.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah, Megan, it has been so hard to hear some of them saying the regret they have that they couldn't do more, that they weren't able to help George Floyd more. This morning, the judge also ordered a brief recess when one of the jurors raised their hand. Could you tell us what happened there? And what else can you tell us about the jury today?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the first break that took place earlier in the 10 o'clock hour, we're now understanding it was because a juror waved her hand, as you mentioned, trying to get the attention of the court because she needed a break. As we understand, that juror had a stress-related incident, the judge said. And so he asked her if she was doing okay. She says she's shaky, but she thinks she's going to be okay. And then it was also revealed that she was having trouble sleeping, that she had been up since 2 a.m. So certainly a glimpse into the stress, the toll, rather, this trial is taking on at least one juror. We also understand that these jurors are very attentive. They are taking notes. They are paying attention. But just within the last couple of minutes here, we're getting word that some of these jurors are choosing not to see the video. Possibly being too disturbed by the video. We don't know, but we know that some of these jurors are just staring straight ahead and they are not paying attention to the video that's on the screen.
Really tough job they have there for sure. Megan, thank you so much for your reporting on what's been going on in the courtroom today. We appreciate it. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz under investigation for possibly sex trafficking a minor, according to law enforcement officials. The New York Times, the first to report those allegations. Law enforcement now confirming the DOJ is looking into whether Gaetz had a sexual relationship with an underage girl and violated federal sex trafficking laws. The Department of Justice launched the inquiry in the final months of the Trump administration. And Gaetz, a Republican and a Trump ally, is vehemently denying these allegations, telling Fox News he's the victim of an extortion plot.
It is a horrible allegation, and it is a lie. What is happening is an extortion of me and my family involving a former Department of Justice official.
Who is this girl? What are they talking about, the New York Times?
The person doesn't exist. I have not had a relationship with a 17-year-old. That is totally false.
NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter joining me now. Tom, there is a whole lot going on here. So let's start with the federal sex trafficking investigation into Gaetz. What new reporting do you have on that today? And take us back, if you will, also to where this all started, an investigation of the Seminole County tax collector. There's so much to get into here.
That's exactly right. Yes. And it is a little bit complicated because there's kind of three investigations here for us to kind of have our hands on, Allison. And good afternoon. I think the third component of this we want to talk about in a couple of minutes. Let's focus on Matt Gaetz and the congressman and this investigation and where it started from. So there's a Seminole County tax collector named Joel Micah Greenberg, and he got tied up in an investigation apparently totally unrelated to any sort of allegation involving sex trafficking. Turns out he was indicted last June and arrested in connection with stalking a political rival of his, setting up fictitious social media accounts, sending letters saying that this person was in an inappropriate relationship. They worked at a school, so it was tied to that. So that was the first indictment. Then we got a second indictment about some sort of identity theft and something that was going on in the tax collector's office where he was apparently taking people's surrendered licenses. So, you know, when you go to get a new license, you have to hand over your old one. So he was taking those. He was putting his picture on them so he could use them for fictitious identification. So that's a little bit curious. Then last August, more serious allegations come down in the form of a second superseding indictment, the third indictment total. And when we look at those allegations, it's that he had some sort of a relationship with a minor victim. He was charged specifically with sex trafficking and also may have accessed the state's DMV, driver's license database, to find information about that minor victim. Also had a relationship or relationships in a sugar daddy type of relationship arrangement, I should say. That's quoting directly from the indictment. And it was out of that investigation into that person, Joel Greenberg, that this investigation into possible sex trafficking by Representative Matt Gaetz, that's where that came from, and that's what led into it. So both investigations ongoing. That investigation into Gaetz believed to have started last summer when, again, that indictment came down in the unrelated case involving his associate. The two know each other. We know that from social media, Allison. That's Joel Greenberg.
Okay, so those are a couple of the investigations. We still have a third situation here, Tom, that I know you know quite a bit about as well. Gaetz is saying here that he has done nothing wrong and that he is the victim of an extortion campaign. Now, law enforcement confirming that there is an entirely separate investigation there. What can you tell us about that?
Right. So that investigation is walled off, and that's based around the statements and allegations made by Representative Gaetz that he received some sort of a contact saying, look, if you pay a significant amount of money, these allegations about sex trafficking will go away. He says it's a former DOJ official that's spreading this, but that person, David McGee, hasn't been at the Justice Department for almost 25 years, Allison. He wasn't a political appointee or some sort of somebody that was appointed from either some sort of an administration. This is just a former federal prosecutor who received accommodations for his work. So we'll have to see where that investigation goes. No idea yet how credible that may be.
This is just an absolutely unbelievable and somewhat confusing story. Yes. Tom, you made it really clear for everybody. Thank you so much for laying out all the different parts.
You got it.
New concerns about nuclear activity in North Korea. Check out these satellite images. They show some sort of steam or smoke rising from a small building at the Yongbyon Radiochemistry Lab, just a week after North Korea fired off 2 short-range ballistic missiles. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell joining me now. Andrea, what do these images suggest to us about North Korea's nuclear activity, and how concerned are our national security experts? And I should also say, wonderful to see you.
Okay, it's great to see you, Allison. Thanks so much for having me. This is concerning. Experts say that this indicates that North Korea either is already processing plutonium to make new bombs, more bombs than it already has, or is about to. And both are concerning because it indicates certainly that this escalation of threats, including the 2 short-range ballistic missiles last week, is putting this new administration and President Biden to the test. Now, this is something that Kim Jong-un had done before with President Obama and also President Trump. But this is the first time we're seeing it in this administration, and it certainly is happening very quickly. There were threatening remarks by his very powerful sister and top advisor, Kim Jong-un's sister, just 2 weeks ago. Then there were cruise missiles fired, which are, according to the administration, national security, and other officials, on the low end of the scale. But then last week, there were these 2 short-range ballistic missiles, which the president addressed in his first news conference last week, and said that if they were to escalate further, he would respond accordingly. Well, now they might be on the brink of doing just that. There's also been more threatening language from other top advisors, including, again, his sister. This all comes after some joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea that were suspended by President Trump very precipitously when he first met with Kim in Singapore, without even telling his defense secretary, then Jim Mattis. And then these military exercises were basically tabletop exercises. They were not kinetic exercises, but even that was enough to put North Korea on edge and also to increase this escalating rhetoric, and now 2 ballistic missiles and possibly more bombs.
Andrea, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, you mentioned the timing here. Obviously that it's a little bit early in Joe Biden's presidency for North Korea to be ratcheting up tensions. Do we have a sense if there's something else going on here, or why perhaps they might be testing President Biden so early on?
Well, President Biden has also, with his top advisors, certainly Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, have been sending signals of being tough on China, of being very supportive of the allies. They've met with Japan. They've gone to Japan and South Korea. President Biden has met with top officials. And this coming Friday now, South Korean and Japanese national security advisors are coming to meet Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor. So President Biden and his top advisors are setting their talking points, but also saying, as the president said last Thursday, that he's interested in diplomacy as well. But just on Monday, Jen Psaki at the White House was asked whether he would be willing to meet with Kim Jong-un the way President Trump did, 3 times actually, and not getting very much for it, except a lot of nice pictures, but certainly no diplomacy, no active diplomacy for at least more than a year, not till February of 2019 when their summit broke down in Hanoi. And her response was, no, he's not going to do it the same way. I'm paraphrasing here. That there's no interest in a summit with Kim Jong-un at this time. So we have to, see how this evolves. But certainly the administration's posture is to tighten up its relationship with its allies and work together with South Korea and with Japan, something that, frankly, President Trump did not do.
Andrea, one last question for you before you go. I understand that Jen Psaki's saying, okay, they're not going to get together and they're going to meet, are not going to get together. They're not going to meet. But as you mentioned, President Biden has said he likes some sort of diplomacy. I know he hasn't specified what he's going to do, but do you have a sense of what that could potentially look like if they are not going to talk face to face? Sure.
There are several levels, and usually until President Trump, who liked that personal diplomacy and liked the, the photo opportunities, frankly, of these grand gestures, the first American president to meet with the North Korean leader. What usually happens is through the New York channel, what they call the New York channel, the United Nations, where there'll be a neutral country where the American diplomats will meet with North Korean diplomats and South Korean diplomats, and also potentially go to Pyongyang, as several of the Trump officials did as well. And past officials, I was there, in fact, a couple of times, once with Secretary of State Albright back in October of 2000. So there's been diplomacy in the past. That, of course, was with Kim's father, but before he took over. But there are a lot of ways to meet and work up to a summit of leaders and see what you're going to get, see that there's something that you're negotiating for. And what President Biden is pushing for is denuclearization, which is a tall order. That has always been the goal. But frankly, in the last 4 years, Kim has really made advances, and it would be very hard to roll back his entire nuclear program.
Andrea, your wealth of knowledge on foreign affairs knows no bounds. We're so lucky to have you on. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thanks.
The Biden administration allowing reporters inside a Border Patrol facility in Donna, Texas, for the first time yesterday. That facility is designed to hold 250 people, but it's actually housing more than 4,100 migrants, over 3,000 of them unaccompanied minors. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns is in Donna to tell us what's going on inside.
Hey, Allison, the first news media cameras were allowed to film inside this facility after mounting pressure from journalists. You know, we've been standing out here for weeks asking for that kind of access. And I'll tell you, although we've been reporting on this for quite some time, to actually see the images of the conditions that we've been describing here, it was striking. You had kids jammed into these plastic partitions, no cages in this facility, but plastic pods where children are sleeping shoulder to shoulder on mats on the floor. Some of the youngest kids, those toddlers, those infants, it is too packed in to keep them in those partitions. So they are sleeping on mats in playpens. And look, Allison, the reality here is this is a facility that was meant to house 250 people. Right now, it has 4,100 people, and 3,400 of those, 3,400, are unaccompanied minors. I want you to hear from the Border Patrol agent that gave the tour of this facility. Take a listen.
This is where they sleep. It's so crowded in those pods that I can't possibly put these young kids in those pods because they're going to get hurt. I'm a father. I don't want to see that. As a Border Patrol agent, I didn't sign up for this. You know, I have kids of my own.
And Allison, that is a message that we have been hearing, that Border Patrol agents feel like they were not equipped to deal with this. And let's be clear here. This is not a facility meant for kids. Kids are not supposed to be in Border Patrol custody. The legal limit is 72 hours, but we know right now that more than 2,000 kids in this facility have been here over that 72-hour limit, and 39 have been in custody for more than 15 days. And what we're hearing is that the agency that's supposed to take these children, Health and Human Services, that has facilities much more appropriate for kids, that transfer is not happening quickly enough. There's this bottleneck that means kids are stuck in these overcrowded centers for far too long. Allison.
All right, let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we start with some news from Pfizer. They're saying their COVID-19 vaccine is safe and 100% effective in preventing COVID in teenagers between ages 12 to 15. Well, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China has, quote, severely undermined the rights and freedoms of people in Hong Kong. Now, today he certified to Congress the island doesn't warrant any unique treatment under U.S. law. That law called for the U.S. to have a relationship with Hong Kong similar to when it was under British control. Well, General Motors recalled 2 of their vans today after reports of 4 engine fires. Now, while the company said it isn't aware of any injuries associated with the issue, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration is urging the owners of some 10,000 General Motors vans to park outside because of fire risks, and at least until there are recall repairs. Well, Delta Airlines saying it will start selling middle seats again on May 1st. The company also says reservations are still valid until the end of this year, or tickets that were purchased this year will be still usable until the end of 2022. And perhaps a little bit of controversy for the royals, or at least the former royals. In their interview with Oprah earlier this month, Prince Harry and Meghan revealed they were married in a secret ceremony 3 days before their public wedding. But now the Archbishop of Canterbury, who married the couple, refutes their claims and says the public ceremony is the real and legal one. Now, NBC News has contacted Harry and Meghan's representatives by email, but they declined to immediately comment on the record. That'll do it for me right now, Allison. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Simone, the royal drama continues. Awesome haircut, by the way. Great to see you. President Biden in Pittsburgh today unveiling the first part of his multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan. Pennsylvania's Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman saying it is no coincidence that Biden chose the Steel City.
If infrastructure is Elvis, Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania is Graceland. This is going to be a bonanza for Pennsylvania, and especially the union way of life.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joining me now from Pittsburgh. Monica, President Biden calling this the American Jobs Plan. It includes spending on transportation and modern infrastructure, things like broadband internet and the electric grid. Tell us more about what's in it, how much money is going where.
Well, this was really the first few months in the focus of the Biden administration, Allison, in terms of wanting to make sure relief was front and center and rescue for the American people. That's why, of course, they prioritized the COVID relief bill and that $1.9 trillion price tag. Now, after getting that passed, they're pivoting to infrastructure and what they view as more of the recovery phase and really trying to help restart the economy in the midst of this health crisis. And they believe that spending more than $2 trillion over the next 8 years is something that will help with millions of jobs, but also it can accomplish, they believe, something very basic that simply has not been fixed in the last administrations, which is many crippling roads and bridges, improving his beloved Amtrak for this president, many other priorities and things that he has wanted to do and that he believes at this moment it's possible because there is so much bipartisan support, at least among voters, for something like infrastructure. But there are many uphill battles now in terms of getting this to have actual Republican support among lawmakers. And of course, now when we talk about who's paying for it and how this will be accomplished, this is where the negotiations begin. But here in Pittsburgh, the president is going to unveil what's in this giant price tag and package. And really, this is the first of 2 phases. So he's going to be talking about the more than $650 billion he would want to invest again in that traditional infrastructure. And then later next month, he's going to be talking about some of the other key elements, the human infrastructure, they call it, or infrastructure at home, things like improving broadband internet, getting more childcare and access to health care. He's really wrapping all of this up and hoping it's something he can accomplish. But again, he's going to have to get Republicans on board in order to label it truly as bipartisan, Allison.
All right, so Monica, I want to ask you about who's paying for it, and I want to ask you about the negotiations. That is the big question, right? Where is this money going to fall? Whose responsibility is it going to be? How are they going to pay for it? How is the Biden administration attempting to answer that right now?
Those are the major sticking points. So if passed, this would increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. And then they're talking about in the next phase, possibly, again, raising taxes on Americans who make more than $400,000. But this is something we've already seen opposition to. Tax hikes across the board are never going to be popular with GOP lawmakers. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell even spoke with the president about this yesterday and said simply he's too concerned about that. And of course, the balloon looming deficit. So you already are hearing what would be expected to be familiar talking points. But there's also a question here, Allison, about whether all Democrats are going to be on board with the way that it is presented as of now. So that's why you start to see these conversations have to happen. Again, this is something that candidate Joe Biden really campaigned on for more than a year. In fact, we're here in Pittsburgh where he kicked off and ended his 2020 campaign in many ways. And that's what you're going to hear him allude to as well in these remarks that are coming up.
All right, so Monica, to winning over Congress, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying she'd like to pass Biden's infrastructure plan by the 4th of July. I understand the president also called Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell about the plan yesterday. Do we have any idea how McConnell reacted or what he said on that call, and any sense of whether this has a chance of actually passing by July 4th?
Yeah, the minority leader really expressing his concerns there and saying that as it stands right now, he can't get on board with it, but of course willing to come to the table and have some discussions about what could be possible. But Allison, you also mentioned this question about the timeline. Speaker Pelosi identifying July 4th as really a wish and hope that they could get it by then, but there isn't that much legislative time between now and then. And if you look at the COVID relief package, the White House was expecting to get that across the finish line way sooner than in the time frame they ended up doing it. Remember, they were just against that mid-March expiration of unemployment benefits. So July 4th is something that is really ambitious. They're hoping they can make it happen, but almost everything has to align correctly. And that's why there's this other major question of whether in the end Democrats are going to have to attempt the same thing they did with the COVID relief bill, which is to go it alone through this process known as budget reconciliation, Allison.
Yeah, a term we're becoming very familiar with in 2021. Monica Alba in the Steel City, thank you so much. More than 45,000 bridges across this country are in poor condition, according to the Department of Transportation. No state knows that better than West Virginia. It has the highest percentage of poor condition bridges in the entire country. NBC News political reporter Vaughn Hilliard joining me now from Charleston, West VA. All right, Vaughn, you're in front of one of those poor bridges. I hate to call it that. How will President Biden's infrastructure plan help bridges like the one behind you and help other repair projects across Western Virginia?
It's going to take a heck of a lot of money for a heck of a lot of bridges. You just said that number, Allison. More than 45,000 bridges have been deemed in poor condition and structurally deficient by the federal government, by the Department of Transportation. This bridge behind me is one of those bridges. It was constructed in 1930. That's 91 years ago. It's a truss bridge that sees thousands of cars pass over every single day. And when you're talking about this infrastructure package here, a package that could go up to $2 trillion here, the president outlined that could impact about 10,000 bridges. Again, that's a far cry from the 45,000 structurally deficient bridges across the country. But, you know, I was talking with the mayor here in town, Amy Goodwin here, and this bridge behind us would cost an estimated $65 to $70 million to either replace or repair. Wow. And when you're talking about a city budget of $100 million, well, do the math. It's going to take a little while to build such a bridge without a federal investment. Take a listen to part of our conversation.
We're 37th in population. We have the 6th largest road system, which means the state has to take care of and maintain 36,000 miles of roadway. That's a heck of a lot of roads and bridges to maintain. West Virginia is picture perfect. West Virginia is ready-made for this Biden plan because the investment of infrastructure that we'll receive is so desperately needed.
More than 20% of West Virginia's bridges here have been deemed structurally deficient. And that's why you just heard the mayor, Mayor Goodwin there, say that a federal investment is needed. It's imperative.
Vaughn, I have to say, the bridge looks pretty good for its age, but I know that simply doesn't cut it when we're talking about structural deficiencies and safety. Vaughn Hilliard in West Virginia, thank you so much for reporting, my friend. Baseball is back. Opening day is tomorrow. Major League Baseball welcoming fans to the stands for the first time since 2019, treating them to a full 162-game season with some new COVID safety protocols. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has more.
The unmistakable symphony of late spring. The sounds of baseball ushering in renewed hope.
It's great to be back. It's therapeutic. I think we've all needed it, not just players and coaches, staff, but also front office and the fans. I mean, hearing the crack of the bat, the sounds and the smells of baseball. It's always been a big part of recovery, whether it was war in the past or economic issues, or in this case, a pandemic or 9/11. We need this. It's a nice way to turn the page and get back to normalcy.
The COVID pandemic reshaped America's pastime in 2020, a shortened season with cardboard cutouts instead of fans in the stands. But this year, baseball's back with a new normal.
We learned quite a bit from last year.
Major League Baseball issuing a 108-page health and safety manual with protocols each team must follow to play ball.
The manual is written in pencil, and we have to be adaptable. And one of the things we learned last year is that if you can't be flexible, you can't play in this environment.
Players are now required to wear contact tracing wristbands and face coverings in team facilities and in the dugout. Players are also restricted on where they can and can't go.
I think it's kind of, you got to just compartmentalize it. We want to do our jobs to the best of our abilities, but at the same time, guys are being safe. The protocol that we have in place, and guys are sticking to that and just trying to stay on our best behavior, I guess, to be able to allow us to do what we love to do.
We can protect them all we want inside, but they still have to follow these outside. And that's where most of the transmission has been occurring. So while we are cautiously allowing them to do outdoor dining, we don't recommend it, and we want them to consider the possibilities. And one of the problems for the players is that although this is a young, healthy population that has a low likelihood of getting serious complications from COVID, their careers could be at jeopardy. If you miss 7 to 10 days of training, that could have a big effect on your potential for making the club or being a starter. I mean, all the players know the story of Wally Pipp, who took a day off due to headache and never got his job back.
Vaccinations aren't mandated, but the league says if 85% of a team gets the shot, they may loosen restrictions.
This year, fans are returning to the stands to watch the games, but it's in a limited fashion. Here at Chase Field, home of the Arizona Diamondbacks, they hope to fill up the stands at some point during the season. Meanwhile, occupancy, it's a state-by-state decision.
I think the players understand the sacrifice they got to make, and that's really what sports is all about for me. And we know that our responsibility is to maintain good health so we can play the game. We're at a very, very critical time. Major League Baseball has worked extremely hard to get us back on the field, and they might have lightened the restrictions, such as having the fans come, and we don't want to miss that. We don't want that to go away. So we want to take our responsibility seriously and make sure that we protect where we're at right now.
Believe me, it's heavy on our shoulders to make sure that every fan that walks through that gate feels comfortable and confident knowing that we have his or her health in mind and safety. And that goes for our staff. It goes for our players and coaching staff. It's a tremendous responsibility. And every day we feel like we're at risk. And knowing that, we're going to take all the proper steps and be as careful and as close to the vest and confident as we can.
A long season ahead with so much at stake on and off the field.
First pitch less than 24 hours away. So who are the MLB teams to watch this year, and which players could become household names this season? Yahoo Sports baseball writer Hannah Kaiser joining me now. Hannah, so awesome to have you on. We just heard from Steve Patterson there that once 85% of a team is vaccinated, the league will loosen up that club's COVID restrictions as part of a deal between the league and the players union. I know you got your hands on the memo that the league sent out about this on Monday. What's the deal here? What changes once a team gets to that 85% threshold?
Well, so there are two factors at play here. There are loosened restrictions for individual players who get vaccinated. And then there are looser restrictions for teams that hit that 85% threshold. So individual players who've gotten the vaccine, they can have family with them on the road. They can attend sort of religious ceremonies. They have sort of looser restrictions for themselves. Now, once a team hits that 85% threshold, they can do things like not wear masks in the dugout, around the clubhouse. And that'll be the stuff that we can really see. Now, one of the things that'll be really important is individuals who have gotten vaccinated, players, will not have to quarantine if they are in close contact with someone who later tests positive. Now, why that's relevant, we just got the news that the Washington Nationals had a player test positive, and now 5 people are having to quarantine in addition because of being close contacts. If those guys had already gotten vaccinated, they would not have to quarantine. Of course, the player who tested positive would still have to quarantine, but that's a big deal when we look at constructing a roster. The Nationals open up tomorrow. They're missing 6 people.
Wow. Yeah, that is a tough way to start the season for sure. All right, let's talk about the LA Dodgers. They're the defending World Series champs. I know you spoke with President of Baseball Operations, Andrew Friedman, and he didn't sound all that satisfied with winning the series after a shortened season. What did he say to you about trying to repeat? I know they have a pretty tough battle in the NL West for the Padres this year.
He said something that was really sad, but I appreciated his honesty. He said, I always wondered what it would be like, what it would feel like to win a World Series, what that breakdown between relief and joy would be like. He said when it finally happened, it was 99% relief and only 1% joy. So they're really motivated to get back. I mean, they have good reason to think that they can. They've been the best team for a really long time in all of baseball. Some projections have them slated to win 104 games. It's crazy to be projecting for over 100 wins. And so I think that they sort of are seeing that, and they think that they deserve more than just the World Series in a shortened season, not getting to play in front of any of their fans, and they think they're still hungry for more.
All right, so who else do you see as some of this season's top contenders? And personally, I just want to know, why will the Yankees win their 28th championship this year?
Well, all right, you'll be happy to hear I predicted them to at least go to the World Series this year, mostly because it just feels overdue. Yes, I mean, the Yankees have been really good. They're probably still the best team in the American League, despite teams like the White Sox and the Blue Jays looking really hot, looking young and fun. I mean, the Yankees have depth. What they have is depth. They went out and they got Garrett Cole ahead of last year. They've added to the team. They are a deep team, which is going to come into play, especially this year when we're coming off of a 60-game season and jumping all the way up to 162. So I feel good about the Yankees in the AL. There's a lot of fun teams in the National League. Crosstown with the Mets. The Mets are suddenly relevant. They're the team to watch. I think they're projected to win what is going to be a really exciting division with Braves, who won last year. I'm from Philly, so I love the Phillies. Nationals are still relevant, although maybe not going to get off to the best start with this COVID protocol. And then, of course, the Padres-Dodgers rivalry is going to be the storyline to watch all season. It is incredible to have two such good teams in the same division.
Hannah, so many things you say there ring true to me. First of all, I'll always root for the Phillies. I'm married to a guy from Philadelphia, so you just can't hate on the Philly sports teams or it makes for an uncomfortable household. Something only New Yorkers could understand. The Mets are suddenly relevant. I mean, my gosh, as someone who grew up in New York in the 80s, we have been waiting for the Mets to be relevant again for so long. And as a diehard Yankees fan, I cannot thank you enough for saying all the things that I love to say and I get eye rolls because I have absolutely no objectivity here. In fact, I took the day off of work tomorrow just to sit home and watch the game. So I'm excited that we potentially have a good season ahead, and I'm hoping Cole gets things started off strong. So let's talk about some of the lesser known players. I know you spoke with executives around the league about who might have a breakout season. I know it's really tough to call this year, especially when, again, we're coming off a shortened season. We don't know how players are going to do this year, getting back into the grind, but who are you keeping your eye on? Anyone that you have big expectations for, or someone you're going to be watching in particular?
Well, we'll give a shout out to if you have any Texas viewers, because there's not a whole lot to be excited about with the Rangers right now. But they have this guy, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who's been moving around
a ton. You can go to the games, right?
You can go to the games. Everyone can go to the games. They'll all be at the games. But it's going to be a rough year for Rangers, and they've got this new ballpark. And why should you go? And I'm excited about this guy. They had him as a catcher and then a third baseman, and he's moved all over. It's really impressive what he's done. He managed to win a Gold Glove in his first season at the major league level. I mean, I love good defense, so I'm excited about him. And I think this didn't actually come up in that story, but the breakout player everyone is looking to have a big season is, of course, Shohei Ohtani. He's back to both hitting and pitching. The Angels are saying that they are full bore on both of those. They are going to let him be a regular starter, which he has not done at the major league level in a couple of years because injuries held him back. And if he can really do that, if he's actually as good a hitter as we know that he can be, and then he adds that reliable front of the rotation starter back into his repertoire, that'll be the most interesting story as a single player around the league.
Well, Hannah, nothing makes me happier than two chicks sitting around talking about baseball. You just made my day. I hope you'll come back on with us again this summer so we could see how it's going, how the teams are doing, how my Yanks are doing, how your Phillies are doing, and check in on some of those potential breakout stars. We really loved having you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'll be at Yankee Stadium tomorrow.
Oh, enjoy it for me, please. The National Labor Relations Board still counting the votes in the high-stakes Amazon union election in Alabama. The NLRB telling NBC News they likely won't be finished until next week. NBC News technology correspondent Jacob Ward joining me from Birmingham, Alabama. Jake, the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer has become ground zero for one of the most contentious union fights in modern American history. What are you hearing from employees there while those nearly 6,000 votes are still being counted?
Well, Allison, this is a truly symbolic moment. I mean, we're right now in the very granular details of trying to sort through who can vote, which names are valid, and then the secret ballot will begin. But it's the historic sort of, iconic quality of this that really has captured the nation's attention. Now, what's so interesting is to talk to people here, Allison, who, many of them say, yes, we want a union to represent us. We need it to improve our circumstances at Amazon. But it's very interesting to talk to people who do not feel that way. We talked to one couple who say they, in fact, spent about $2,000 on flyers to promote the idea that Amazon already gives them what they need. Here's what they had to say. Have a listen.
When we signed up to come work at Amazon, they didn't lie to us. They said you will be working long hours, 10-hour shift, 12-hour shift, or 8-hour shift. You will be standing. You have to lift 30 or 40 pounds. And like I said, we're not against unions. We're against this particular union.
They have training, they have certifications, but we have to intrinsically be motivated to take advantage of those things. So you have to look at Amazon and the totality of what they offer beyond the immediate paycheck and look at the possibilities for the future.
I was very struck, Allison, by, the way that they sort of situated themselves in the history of labor in this country, the way in which, they consider there to be a future at Amazon, one that may not necessarily need unions. You don't hear that kind of thing from workers these days. So very interesting conversations here in Birmingham.
Jake, I hate to ask you to pull out your crystal ball, but do you have a sense of where this is leaning here, or could this still fall in either direction?
When we speak to people on both sides of it, nobody wants to make a prediction, but that itself is notable. Yeah. Nobody is saying we are confident that X, Y, Z is going to happen. We do hear that turnout is pretty good. Union votes typically don't have enormous amounts of turnout, but the national attention seems to have drawn a lot of electricity to this effort. So we don't know where it's going yet, but certainly the discussion has been fascinating, Allison.
All right, Jake Ward, I know we'll be checking in with you about this one again later in the week and next week as well. Thank you for your reporting.
Appreciate it.
March Madness heading into the Final Four this weekend. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court hearing its first case involving college sports in over 35 years. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams joins me now. Pete, we know the hot button in the issue in the NCAA, should athletes be paid? This case did not directly involve that. So tell us what the Supreme Court is actually considering here.
It doesn't involve that, but it may involve the NCAA's ability to stand and fight any such things in the future. Here's what the case is about. The schools wanted to give more benefits to students for educational programs, related benefits like computers, musical instruments, scholarships after they're no longer playing, paid internships after they're no longer playing. And the NCAA blew the whistle on that and said, no, that's too much. That could jeopardize the amateur quality of student athletics, which is what makes it so popular in America. And the Supreme Court, the lower court said, you know what, that's way too stringent. These are modest benefits. They should go ahead. So the NCAA appealed. And it did seem today from the argument that the Supreme Court's going to agree with the lower courts and say that these modest benefits should be allowed. Several of the justices said they were concerned about how college athletics has developed under the NCAA's leadership, with coaches, for example, Clarence Thomas said, making millions and millions of dollars, but the student athletes getting nothing. Brett Kavanaugh saying the federal law shouldn't be used to exploit student athletes. So it did seem that they would allow these rules to go ahead. But as to the larger question, many of the justices said they were concerned that if the courts keep picking away at what the NCAA does every time somebody proposes something for athletes, the whole thing could collapse. That's the way Chief Justice John Roberts said it. And Sonia Sotomayor said, I'm concerned that we may completely destroy the nature of college athletics. So I think for this round, the students win. But the larger question remains, how much authority will the NCAA retain to do what it says is essential to keep the amateur quality of student athletics?
So, Pete, given that, in your reporting, you spoke with an expert in sports law at Tulane who said this could be the gateway to answering the question of whether student athletes can be paid to play. Let's talk about how the outcome here could determine that.
Right. Well, so believe it or not, this case is actually about antitrust law. And here is why.
Right.
Coaches and schools compete intensively for the best players and have the best stadiums and all that. The NCAA rules limit that competition by saying this is the same rule for everybody. You can't pay them. You can't give them more benefits than this. So that is, in theory, a violation of antitrust law. What the NCAA says is we get a pass for that because there's a benefit, maintaining the amateur status of sports. So here's the real question here and why this case could be the sort of pivot point. If the Supreme Court says, you know what, the NCAA is overplaying its hand, the test under antitrust law is actually a more demanding one, then that could limit the NCAA's ability to, when schools want to come back and say, okay, let's start giving every student who shows up to play $5,000 or $6,000 or $10,000 or whatever. If the NCAA's ability to stop that is limited, then you're going to head more toward pay to play. But you know what? The courts may not play the ultimate role here, because already some states are passing laws saying you have to allow student athletes to be compensated. So they may have the final say here. Congress may have the final say, too. But for now, it's still in the courts. And it does see that the NCAA did not have a good day today.
Pete, it is such a fascinating debate and a very interesting one coming just days before the Final Four. Thank you so much. All right, let's bring in Richard Jefferson. He played in the NCAA with the University of Arizona before spending 17 years in the NBA. Richard, it's so great to have you on. Thanks for being here. The player compensation rules in the NCAA are strict, to say the very least. You got suspended for going to the NBA Finals with Bill Walton when you were a Wildcat. Can you tell us that story and what you want to see change for college basketball players?
Well, ultimately, Luke Walton, who is the former head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers and now the head coach of the Sacramento Kings, he was my roommate in college. We, pretty much did everything. But he had three brothers that also played high-level college basketball. So during the summer, he said, Richard, if you would like to come out and train with my sons in their backyard, just hooping and hanging out, I will allow it. So he basically bought me a $100 plane ticket to come out because my family couldn't afford it. And he happened to be working the NCAA or in the NBA Finals and said, here's an extra ticket. Okay, so fast forward 3 months later, I'm telling the story to some reporter. NCAA gets wind of it, and then I am suspended. So it cost me my eligibility. It put me in a position where I had to repay said money. And all of a sudden, you're looking at it as like these rules are so confusing. Like, this is my roommate. This is a teammate. His father is an alumni of UCLA. Yeah. I'm at Arizona. So you just didn't really truly understand what it was. And as a 19-year-old kid, I literally risked everything. My college eligibility. They could have been far more harsh than they were, but it just shows that like how confusing these things were. And this was in the 90s.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that his dad was a UCLA alum. Just, this guy you might have heard of once or twice before. So let me ask you, given what you went through, given how young you were and what was potentially on the line for you, what would you like to see change in the NCAA? What would you like to see different for college basketball players today?
Well, it's not just college basketball. I think Justice Thomas said it best. He's like, I'm very curious as how to all of these, coaches, the money has gone up. If you look at the athletic directors, if you look at the presidents of these universities, the people the commissioners that run each conference, you've seen team after team switch conferences fighting for more money. Well, that means that each school gets more money. That means each opportunity that pops up, but the athletes aren't able to, I don't want to say necessarily capitalize this, but now if these athletes can bring in, money based off of their social media following, that is still illegal. And this is when people people need to understand about likeness, and is the NCAA taking advantage of their players? When you look at individuals that can have a big time shot in the NCAA tournament, well, the video of that shot can be used to sell burgers for the next 25 years. And even if that athlete goes on to be a Hall of Famer, they can't use their likeness because the school and the NCAA owns this. There is a reason why EA Sports got rid of college football as one of their games and got rid of NCAA football as one of their games, because they were using athletes' likeness, maybe not their name, maybe not like their complete image, but they were making money off of college athletes, and the college athletes weren't seeing it. So then the NCAA, to be proactive, took away that license from EA Sports. But it just shows you that this individual NCAA level has been just going on and taking advantage of their athletes. And when you see coaches like Saban or Calipari, two of the top tier college and football and basketball coaches, making $5 to $7 million, when you see commissioners making millions of dollars, and they're like, we don't know where the money would come from to give these athletes the type of support that is needed.
Yeah, it seems that there's no question they would find a way to find the money if they were forced to. Richard, great to have you on. I know it's a conversation we're going to be having for a while now. I hope you'll come back to talk about it more.
Thank you for having me.
The Final Four is set. UCLA and Gonzaga taking the last two spots, joining Baylor and Houston. We've got a great weekend of college basketball to look forward to after some great hoops last night. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders has your March Madness update.
Allison, we have all been consumed with this, getting appointments, worrying about COVID, socially distancing, spending most of our time still indoors at home. So a little college hoops, what a great distraction. And boy, did we have some excitement last night.
There's the catch. Here's the shot. Wagner off the glass. No! Oh, it's over!
Overnight, a massive upset in the men's Elite Eight. 11 seed UCLA stunning number 1 Michigan. The Bruins jumping for joy after a thrilling win, led by star sophomore Johnny Juzang. The storied program back in the Final Four for the first time in over a decade.
Unbelievable heart, toughness. Nobody picked us. Nobody believed in us.
Earlier, Gonzaga, the tournament's top seed, moving one step closer to an undefeated season, blowing out USC. Behind the strong play of sophomore Drew Timme.
To attack, but you've got to be careful. Kevin, something happened to one of the referees.
Early on, a scary scene. Referee Bert Smith collapsing on the court. Medical personnel rushing to help. Smith was taken off by stretcher, but thankfully did not need to be hospitalized. Back on the floor, Gonzaga's incredible chemistry.
It was a great pass.
Securing their spot in the Final Four. Meanwhile, in the women's Elite Eight, taking center stage in the Lone Star State, number 1 South Carolina, dominating Texas.
Goes to the left and the flip up and in.
The Gamecocks building a big lead and never looking back.
Boston drops it off for Henderson.
Closing out the night, a slugfest between Stanford and Louisville. Louisville was rolling early.
Smith lines it up and knocks down another 3.
But top-seeded Stanford found their groove late.
Williams launches in a bomb.
I'm just so happy that we get to stay here and hopefully play 2 more games. I want 2 more games for the team.
A fitting finale with all eyes now on the Final Four.
If you had these 4 teams in your bracket, and we're talking about UCLA, then wow, you are something special. You might want to start picking a stock for the NASDAQ, a long shot, because you are either really good or really lucky. Allison?
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.